Hello, welcome to my YouTube channel. It's your boy Festus Obi, and I make videos that are tech related, especially for people who are in the IT industry or planning to get into the IT industry. So if you've been watching my channel, you would have noticed that I was away for a couple of weeks, and the reason is because I thought it right to take time away to figure out a lot of stuff, handle a lot of issues. Most importantly, my right eye, I've been battling some health issues with my right eye and some complications. And my advice on this note before going further is never get so caught up in your day-to-day activities that you forget that the most important thing is your health. So what are we talking about today, guys? So today we are talking about gear. Does gear matter when you're learning programming or learning coding or planning to get into IT in general? Does it actually matter? So without further ado, let's dive straight in. So why do people ask these questions when they are trying to get into IT? There are two major reasons that I can think of from the top of my head. The first one is that they are on a tight budget. So like every other thing, trying to get into college, trying to, take that vacation or whatever. If you're really someone who is conscious and understands about financial planning, this is something you need to consider. Like your budget is something you need to consider when getting into IT. It's really one of those fields that you need to invest in to be able to reap benefits, just like medicine, banking, and all of those. Except in this case, you probably are not just going to be buying books or paying for courses. You probably invest even more on the hardware itself. So that is so understandable. That reason is so understandable. The second reason is because a lot of people are scared of getting started, so subconsciously their brain is telling them that, oh, I don't have the right gear. So they start asking questions. Does it really matter? Can I do this with that? Can this computer help me get started? And all of those. While that is unfortunate, it is normal to be scared and want to always chicken out of anything in life. But this video is going to clear out those doubts by answering the question that you have in mind. So moving on, does gear actually matter? When we talk about gear, we mean computer, hard disk, even the table, the desk, and everything should be considered as gear. But most of this other stuff, from a productivity standpoint, you would understand why they are necessary. For example, your desk. It is important that you have somewhere that you're sitting upright and working. That is going to boost your productivity. Depending on who you are, it might be important for you to have, say, maybe a tablet or a notepad or something to write. All of those stuff are personal to you and what actually helps you get productive. But on this video, we're going to be focusing on the primary thing, which is the computer itself. So the computer you use, does it actually matter when you're learning programming? And the answer to that question is, it depends. Now, I know this is the answer that a lot of people hate hearing when, going to search for answers on YouTube from other creators. But the problem is, when you ask questions that are not streamlined or don't have a lot of facts, you can't get a straight answer, so to say. That's it. So like, if we have to look at a lot of factors to be able to get an answer that fits your particular issue, your particular doubt, so to say. So from an operating system standpoint, we have three major operating systems, and that is macOS, Windows, and Linux. So if you're considering learning programming and your question is based off of which operating system to choose, then it has to also depend on what kind of programming you want to do. If you are a web developer and you want to get into web development, any of these three would work just fine, since we've gone past those days when there are tools that don't work on one of this operating system, and then there are others that work on this and does not work on that. We've gone past those stages, as the major companies that build tools for software developers, like Microsoft, for example, they build the tools that are cross-platform, so you can use on any of those. And even the ones that are not available have alternatives that work pretty much just fine on the other operating systems. So if that is your question from an operating system standpoint, and you want to be a web developer, pretty much anyone would work. The only problem is if you want to be, say, for example, a game developer or maybe a mobile developer, then that is something you would want to look into, because from the top of my head, I'm sure it will be next to impossible for you to be an iOS developer using a Linux machine or a Windows machine. There are obviously ways to go around this, but as a beginner, it is not something you want to even try. So if you want to be, for example, an iOS developer, just go for macOS, easy peasy. So moving on, if the operating system is not what your question is about, if it is on the basis of the hardware that the computer itself has, that is also understandable, since when buying a computer, you want to consider storage, memory, the processor, the battery life, power as it may be called, and what else? That's pretty much the most important thing to actually consider. So when it comes to the storage, I used to be one of those that wanted a computer with 1 terabyte, 2 terabytes. Sometimes I even buy computers and I add to boost that up. But I've come to realize that there are a lot of habits that we actually entertain that is pretty much horrible and unnecessary. For example, I noticed that I changed my computer recently, and I noticed that I had a lot of projects that I built when I was in the university that are still on my computer that I never even look at. There is no need for it to be there. Even if I want to look at it, there are other places I could store them. External hard disk, for example, and the basic one everybody in IT should know. You could store it on a repository in the cloud. So for example, GitHub or whatever, you store it somewhere that whenever you need it, you can easily go and look at it, copy the parts you need, or even pull the entire project back to your computer. So we have all of those stuff on our computer that we don't need, and that makes it impossible for us to choose a computer right, because then you're looking at a lot of things. You're looking at the storage, which, the higher it is, the more expensive it is, which gives you a barrier to be able to make that decision as fast as you can. So in my opinion, a computer with 256 gigabytes would actually suffice. That is actually the sweet spot these days, since if you're going to be using it for just programming, the only thing you need to have on that computer are mostly the tools you need, which probably wouldn't exceed, say, VS Code and a terminal. That's pretty much it. And then every other thing would be like packages and all that does not actually need that much space. The rest you can pull up from the cloud whenever you need it. So moving on, when it comes to battery, the battery is something that is still a bit dependent on your lifestyle and where your geographical location. As someone who lives in Europe, I pretty much don't think there is any need for me to consider going for a computer that would last for 20 hours. Yes, if I have the money to do that, that's a plus if the computer has that. But I think any computer that the power without being plugged lasts for like say 3-4 hours is pretty much fine, since there is uninterrupted power supply here. So if you're living in Africa or some parts of Asia where this is a big problem, that is important. It is important for you to consider, or look at getting, say, an external power supply like a power bank or something. So moving on to the last one, the RAM or memory. This is also something that complicates issues when people are considering buying a computer. And there is this misconception that the more memory you have, the faster your computer is. But it actually isn't the case. It's not exactly like well put. If you're someone who does not work with a lot of tools at the same time, so for example, you're learning web development, and at a particular time, you pretty much have just VS Code open and maybe Google Chrome, a 4 gigabyte RAM, like memory, would work just fine. You don't have to stress your budget going to get that 8 gigabyte memory because you think it's going to, increase your productivity times 200, whatever it is. A 4 gigabyte RAM would do just fine. All right, so that's pretty much it. So in summary of what I've been trying to say in this entire video, one thing you have to bear in mind is gear does matter regardless of whatever field you're in. The one thing that a lot of creators say, people who are into programming, the one thing they say that I don't actually find, as a perfect answer is, when I was learning, you hear people say things like, if you're just learning, it doesn't matter because you're just learning programming from the beginning. So pick up whatever it is you have and get going. But that actually depends on what you want to learn. it is a perfect advice for someone who wants to get into web development, because for starters, you're starting with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and this doesn't really require that much when it comes to the hardware. But when you want to learn something like game development or mobile development, then that's where the problem is. Of course, you're going to start by learning the basics of that particular programming language, whether it be Java, C# or whatever. But come on, you're going to learn that programming language max 4 weeks to 5 weeks, and then you have to actually start building projects. So while it is a good advice for you to have or use whatever it is you have at the moment to learn how to program, eventually you're going to need something that is decent and can do the job that you want to get done. So if you fall under the category of people who's just making excuse, okay, the gear I have would not work, well, this is my answer for you. If it is 4 gigabytes of RAM, power supply is okay, the storage is fine, processor is fine, you can do it. Stop making excuses. And on that note, that's where we end the video for today, guys. See you next week.